both the deaths of despair and in the United States, this phenomenon I've talked about, are basically problems of whites. They're not problems of African Americans.
I was going to ask you that.
Or Hispanics. It's basically whites. I mean, to a much greater extent than you would think. So what we have currently is a huge crisis amongst young people, and the number to have in people's head is something like this. So I would say that 10% of young women, say around 22, 23 or so, report that every day of their lives is a bad mental health day. That was not true. That was not true 10 years ago. That's not true of the vast majority of people. It's not true of people my age, but it is true of young people. And that's something that's transformed itself. So we're faced with a situation at schools and at universities and so on, where 10%, that's a rough number to have in here, slightly less for boys. But we have 10% of young people who say they're really unhappy. The vast majority of people say they're fine. So we have to sort of separate. That wasn't true 10 years ago.
Dr. Danny, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to get you on. To finally have you.
I'm sorry I've been hard to get hold of, but life has been rather busy recently with all the stuff we're going to talk about going on.
You're a very busy man. I'll tell you that. I'll tell the audience. He's a very busy man. So
well, I'm actually on sabbatical this year. And I'm actually full-time. The president of Dartmouth has given me the year to go and work on exactly this stuff because my big boss thinks it's important. So if your big boss thinks it's important, you're probably doing all right, right?
So Danny, you study happiness and you study it globally.
I do.
The first thing is, what made you get into that? And
well, so it's a long story. I used to be a guy who worked on wages, right? And the thing about wages is that there's actually what we'll call patterns in the data. If you look at wages in Botswana or Lesotho or Peru, whatever, there's patterns in the data. Around 2000, there started to be data available on happiness and well-being. And I thought to myself, why do economists care about people, how they do? And they don't, and we focus on things like the inflation rate, unemployment, GDP. But in the end, nobody eats those things. They care about utility. They care about well-being. So I sort of thought to myself, well, maybe what I should do is start to look at these data and first of all, go and see, sounds crazy, but go and see if there are patterns in the data. Does it make sense to measure it? If it does, well, if you measure it one way, you get one answer. If you measure it another way, you get another answer. And as time went on, I realized that actually it didn't really matter that much how you asked it or what you did with it. There were patterns in the data, and there were two big patterns. The first one was unemployed people are really, really unhappy. So if you argue that, unemployed people are lazy bastards, well, that shouldn't be, that's not consistent with that, because if they were just lazy and they thought it was great to be unemployed, then they'd be happy. Well, it turns out they're not. And the other thing, which basically took probably 15 years of my life, was it turned out that there were patterns in the data, which was that happiness looked to be U-shaped. And it looked to be that there was a midlife crisis, and the young were especially happy, and the older were especially happy. And in the middle, basically 50-year-olds were not happy. So that held for a really long time. And I wrote a little while ago, this looks like one of the most important patterns in social science, it's even true amongst chimpanzees and gorillas. And then I realized, and then I wrote until it wasn't. I wrote this paper and I said, look, there are 600 papers that find this. Everybody who teaches happiness around the world, they go read these papers. Well, they were right then, but they ain't right now. The good thing is actually, I thought to myself, well, all these people are going to write and say, Blanchflower, you were completely wrong. So I thought I'd better be the person to go in there and say, Blanchflower, you were wrong. So that's what I did.
I love it. I love it. So, Danny, so how would you describe happiness? What are people, when these researchers mention happiness in their paper, what are they tracking for? What are they measuring?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So there's two parts to it, and it's a little more complicated than you would think. So the first thing is happiness means a general sense of well-being, a general sense that things are okay. But in the past, I used to think if you asked me the question, what's unhappiness, I would say to you, it's the opposite of happiness, right? I think they're sort of mirror images of each other. They're sort of flip of each other. Well, that turns out not to really be true anymore. So it's a bit more complicated. Happiness is a general sense of well-being. Maybe some people want to use words like, are you flourishing? But it turns out in America, the big issue is actually it's not just about happiness, it's not just about unhappiness, but what's happened is that the tail, if you like, there are 10% of people, particularly young people in America, are in a terrible situation. They're extremely unhappy. Most people are pretty fine. Most people are happy. And if you said to them, we looked at happiness and unhappiness, they'd be the flip of each other. They used to be the flip of each other, but they're no longer. So it's a bit complicated to say, if you said to me, what's happiness? If I said to you, used to say to you, it's the flip image of unhappiness, that's just not true. So what we have currently is a huge crisis amongst young people. And the number to have in people's head is something like this. So I would say that 10% of young women, say around 22, 23 or so, report that every day of their lives is a bad mental health day. That was not true. That was not true 10 years ago. That's not true of the vast majority of people. It's not true of people my age, but it is true of young people. And that's something that's transformed itself. So we're faced with a situation at schools and at universities and so on, where 10%, that's a rough number to have in here, slightly less for boys. But we have 10% of young people who say they're really unhappy. The vast majority of people say they're fine. So we have to sort of separate. That wasn't true 10 years ago, but it is true now. So happiness is about the sense of well-being, but the sense of unhappiness is obviously a really big deal. And we can talk about its characterizations, but unhappy people, are basically in trouble. So we're worried about them not making the transition from school to work. We're worried about them withdrawing from the labor force. We're worried about them not establishing patterns and relationships and not having good health. So mental health impacts physical health. And we know, for example, happy people live longer. Happy people heal faster. In your work, you must know if you have a good attitude, a good, happy attitude is really healing. And so what we've got here is transformation. I gave you a long answer, but essentially the data now is clear. And roughly, I would say, if you ask this question, how many of the last 30 days have been bad mental health days? The majority of people say nil. How many days over the last month have been bad mental health? Most people say nil. But there's a lot of people who say every day of my life is bad. And that's the focus we have on all the work we're doing. Is this true? Why has it happened? Has it happened across other countries? But this is, I would say, the number one crisis, and the US Surgeon General has talked about a crisis of loneliness, unhappiness, but it's not of everybody. It's of this, having people's heads, the 10% of young people are in deep trouble.
Gotcha. So I love long answers, Danny. That's fine.
Sorry. It was a good answer, though.
Very good answer. It's complicated. So happiness has been declining from what I'm getting around the world. When did it start? What time did you guys start noticing the dip?
So here's the two parts to it. So in around 2004, I wrote a paper which basically showed that there was this U-shaped happiness. As I say, hundreds of papers have written about it since around 2004. But essentially what happened from around 2013 or so, around there, we suddenly started to see disproportionately the well-being of the young starting to collapse. So there used to be a U-shape, which meant that the really happy people were youngsters. But essentially, so you think of the U, well, the bit of the U which sloped up suddenly has dropped. So instead of a U-shape, you've basically got happiness rises in age. The least happy, so unhappiness declines in age and happiness rises in age. So the least happy people now are young people. When did we spot it? Well, it took me a while to see it. John Haidt and Jean Twenge, famous researchers, sort of spotted it ahead of me, and I went and looked and thought, gosh, they're right. The answer is from around 2013, we got confused in a way by COVID. We said, oh, look, this is all COVID. But now when we look back, we realize that the trend had really started from 2013 or so through 2020, and COVID simply extended it. So I would say it came in 2013, and you're going to say to me, well, what happened around 2013? That's obviously where we're going to go. And you could say, oh, it was the end of the Great Recession. It was change in attitudes and all the rest of it. But there's one big thing that basically John Haidt particularly has pushed, and he's right, I think, that the coming of the smartphone, the coming of the internet, the coming, if you like, of Facebook and Snapchat and Reddit and all, TikTok and all of that, particularly, so it's particularly come since then. And you can time this crisis from the emergence of this phenomenon of the smartphone. And basically, I'm doing this work around the world in places that don't have the internet, like Africa. You don't really have it. You have it amongst the internet savvy. You don't have it. I'm looking at Asia at the moment. You don't have it in many of these Asian countries which don't have the internet. So when you have the internet and you start to have this essentially this bullying, cyberbullying in some ways, and you see the decline in the well-being of the young, and particularly what you see is there's a high correlation, not necessarily so we can argue about what's causing this, but a very high correlation between the number of hours people spend looking at their smartphones and how anxious and depressed and mentally ill they are.
Wow. Wow. So in countries where there's no internet or no one's like smartphone savvy, you don't see this difference.
That's exactly right. So we have a new paper just coming out on Africa. And basically what we find is that the internet savvy. So if you do a survey, to get in the survey, you have to be able to use the internet, right? So anybody who answers this survey are internet savvy. And those people have the same things as we have in America. Young people are unhappy. But if you go to the places to people who don't have access to the internet, I mean, in Africa, you ask a question, have you ever used the internet? A rough rule of thumb, half the people have never used it ever, right? So that's a pretty good, and basically what you find is the phenomenon doesn't happen there. And so obviously that's a pretty big deal. And we're finding that as well in Asia. To some extent, Latin America is a bit in between, but there's all sorts of issues we can get to, which are actually about kids and kids in school. And that's a big deal. So we have evidence from around the world of basically 12 to 16-year-olds. So think of middle school or some sort, right? And we've seen really since 2013, the collapse around the world in their well-being. And correlated with that is the rise in the amount of time people spend on the phone. So essentially what I see are two things. If you spend more than 4 hours a day on your phone, that's going to be associated, perhaps we can argue about what causes what, but let's assume it's associated with poor mental health. And another fact that we were working on is, and people listening to this should get this, the younger you were when you got your first smartphone, the more likely you are to be in mental illness later. So if I take a 25-year-old, right, take a 25-year-old, and I say, well, what age did you get your smartphone? If you got it under the age of 10, that's really bad. And if you got it before the age of 18, that's bad. But it's like more or less linear. The younger you were that you got it, the worse is your mental health 15 years later, right? So, I mean, a dozen years, whatever. But so those things are really a big problem. And now we see this America, Australia, Canada, the UK, France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand. We've seen all these countries. And then obviously the question is, well, what happens elsewhere? They don't quite have the spread of the internet, but as it comes, the suspicion is these problems are gonna emerge. So this is a growing international crisis. I mean, the problem is what in goodness only's name do we do about it? And we can talk more about that.
Okay, so in a nutshell, the happiest times used to be U-shaped. They used to be when you were the youngest. You hit middle age, we all go through midlife crisis, I guess, and then it gets back. Your happiness starts to incline again. It starts to go back up again.
So it would be, I think of happiness just be U-shaped. It would be happy when you're young, unhappy when you're middle aged, and then happiness still seems to rise, say between the age of about 50 and 65 or so. There's something quite complicated and interesting when you get to 65, which is that when happiness, you say to me, does happiness matter? I think it really matters, because in fact what researchers have shown is if I take you at 65 and I ask you how happy you are, guess what it predicts? It predicts
I'm a millennial.
how long you're going to live for. It predicts longevity. So happy people live longer, and happy people. I mean, I'm interested in your view about, as a nurse, I mean, if you have a good attitude to things, do you agree? I mean, attitude is everything. I mean, being happy and contented and maybe healthy, but that predicts longevity.
Yeah. Yeah. Gratitude, having gratitude.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think if you say to someone, someone says, I'm going to beat this. I really, and they have a much greater chance of beating it than going, just how it is. So we started to observe physical manifestations of this, right? Happy people live longer. Happy people heal faster. So they do experiments with students. I tell the students, I say this, it's an experiment I'd like to do because I could inflict harm on my student. Listen, you'll see what I mean. So what happens is they ask students, how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And then what they do in these experiments is they take a skin biopsy, right? They go, take a skin biopsy. And guess what? Your happy score predicts how fast you heal. Right. So these things that actually matter. And obviously, we start to think I'm a labor economist, and I care about people making a successful transition from school to work. If you're depressed when you're 20, think of it as a step. You go to university so you can make it easier to step into the job market. Well, if around the age of 20 or so, it's like having a big spell of unemployment. If you're hurt at that point, it's very hard to make the step into the big wide world out there. And if you don't make it by the age of 25, the chances are there's a permanent scar against you. And we don't want that. We don't want those things to happen. And so the world is trying to think about what to do, but we're a little late in the game because we have so many people who've been scarred by this essentially cyberbullying.
Let me ask you, what do you mean scarred by 25? If you don't get
let's think of this. I mean, so I'm a professor at Dartmouth. We have lots of Dartmouth students, and the evidence amongst university students is that many of them are in the same situation where they're having trouble with mental things. One possibility is that things are happening at Dartmouth that are causing it. One possibility, something's going on at Dartmouth. Another possibility is that they had this problem when they were 15 at high school, and they were cyberbullied, and it's had an effect on their mental health. And then the problem is that we didn't cause it. We inherited it from what happened when they were 16. They're 22 now, but it happened 6 years ago. And obviously the question is, what do we do about it? Now, a big story that John Haidt has been pushing, and he's a great guy to talk to, and I think he's wonderful. He's been arguing, and the country's really got onto this. Let's try and take the smartphones out of the hands of students and allow them to come back into the classroom to chat to each other, to engage with each other. And that seems to have positive benefits. The state of Florida, the governor has said you can't have cell phones. It's a great idea. The only problem is that doesn't fix the fact that in the school, you're not on the cell phone, but then they go home and spend 9 hours on the phone in the evening, right? So that's not fixing the problem. But I have a colleague of mine who's really interesting in this, and she says, this is a really good answer, sort of neuroscientist answer. She says, so you and I are chatting here, and I'm saying you nod and you smile. We're interacting with each other. You have a smile on your face. Okay, you nod your head. So apparently, when you're 14 and you're 15, your brain is actually developing, right? So at my age and yours, excuse me being rude, but our brains have kind of got there, right? But apparently neuroscientists say, so it's not just that you spend 7 hours on your cell phone, it's that you should be interacting with people. I should be looking at you nodding, and my brain is developing, and it's developing skills because that's what you do when you're 14 and 15 and 16. And they say that a lot of the evidence is that it's not even what you're spending your time on in the cell phone, it's what you're not spending your time on. You should be spending your time on learning about social interactions and let your brain develop and learn skills. And so the danger is that might be a scar. I mean, who knows whether if it's too late by 25, your brain hasn't. So that they don't really know. But the concern is that these might have permanent, long-lasting effects. And the answer is we don't exactly know what to do about any of this. I mean, take the smartphone away from school, but think about at university. What can we do? We can't take smartphones away from people. you can't in your hospital take cell phones away from people. It's just not possible. You just can't. You can't have it in the operating theatre, but you can have it in the loo, whatever, right?
Right. You can definitely have it in the loom. You can
You know
Danny,
what I'm saying? So this is a new phenomenon. And the reason it's so scary is we didn't really know about it early enough. So, okay, here we are in 2024. We're trying to think about these issues. But it's been going on for 10 years. We should have been doing something about it in 2016 and 2017 and 2018. And then perhaps we would have noticed it if COVID hadn't come along. But we then had COVID and we're like, oh, we got to focus on COVID. And we didn't really realize these pressures. And of course, the cell phone, the smartphone people, Facebook and all the rest of it, they don't want anything to do with this. They want to deny it to them.
Of course, it's bad for business, Danny. Come on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I did a podcast the other day in Freakonomics, and they brought someone on afterwards to kind of counter against me. And at the end, he said, but I work for Meta. It's like, oh, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? You would say Blanche Brown's an idiot because I work for Facebook. Oh, okay, got it.
Makes a lot of sense. Gave it
Yeah,
a lot
really.
of. So Danny, let's talk about the actual data. What's going on?
Yeah.
So, in some of your research, it says there's been a massive increase in the amount of mental health visits to clinicians. This is like in Canada. It's not just in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
There's been also more suicidal attempts from younger people. Substance use.
Let's go back to the suicide thing. So the suicide thing is something we really have to be very careful about.
Okay.
It's certainly true. There's not a great deal of evidence yet, thank goodness. But, we don't. I'm always very cautious talking about suicide. There has certainly been a big rise in suicide thoughts and attempts at self-harm. There has not, thankfully, to this point yet, and I hope there will not be, an actual rise in suicides. But I don't want to go there. But obviously, things like how do you feel? Have you thought about committing suicide? Have you made an attempt at it? All of that kind of stuff. It doesn't look good. It does not look good. So self-harm is a better way. Let's talk about self-harm. People are self-harming more. That's an easier thing to talk about. So any measure that you take, how do you feel? Are you feeling anxious? What do you feel about your body? What do you think about your body? All of that kind of stuff. So in a sense, you can ask me questions about it, but it doesn't really matter what you ask me. The answer is that, the trend is up for young people, and especially up for young women. So I would say the number roughly is that all the trends I observe for young women are also true for young men. But if you look at my thing I call despair, currently, so the things just move together. I sort of say, well, 11% of young women and 7% of young men. So yeah, it's true. The trends and everything are the same, but they're always much higher for young women. Now, what's interesting in Africa, so I've just been working on it, the incidence of smartphones and accessing the internet is much lower for women than it is for men. It looks like women spend more time on smartphones in America than men do, than boys do.
Oh.
In Africa, I mean, think of it, so, they don't get the father figure gets the phone. So disproportionately in Africa, the data we're looking at, women have less access to smartphones than men do.
And just by the data, is there any differences with?
Well, we're starting to. Yeah, we do. We still see generally around the world. I mean, less so in Africa again, but we generally do see in the data, certainly in the English-speaking advanced countries, we certainly see that the trends amongst women everywhere are worse.
Okay.
So, bigger. I mean, if I just say, proportion of people who did visits to mental hospital, the proportion who access care, the proportion who say they're anxious and depressed, all of that kind of stuff. I don't think there's much dispute. In a way, there's not much dispute with clinicians and academics and people working on this, on the fact that this thing is a phenomenon that exists and is a huge crisis. There is a dispute about what causes it. Why is this come? Is this just because of a change in stigma? Is it because of the? But in the end, that doesn't matter. I always say to people, I broke my ankle, and I went to the doctor. And did the doctor really need to know how I broke my ankle? No, he just needs to know he'd broken the ankle. He's going to fix it. I mean, obviously, he'd like to know if it's something happened. People were riding a scooter, and the scooter was dangerous. We can fix that later. But for the doctor didn't really care how I did it. he just had to fix it because I broke it. And I think we're in that position. There is this crisis we need to do something about. And I've been thinking very seriously and hard about what to do. And it's really hard to come up with things. It just is.
So Danny, though, are you guys noticing if there's certain website differences with website usage? Like women use Instagram more, maybe guys don't use it as much to compare their bodies, and
Yeah.
does that...
Well, people are starting to think about that. I mean, yes, the answer is people are looking at. I mean, I sort of take the view, and it's more of a kind of considered guess that I think a lot of it has to do with body shaming. I think that's a really big deal. I mean, I've talked to students, I give these papers, and students come and say to me that they really, I mean, I'm starting to think about body shaming and so on. So I think that's a big explanation. I mean, I have to try and explain why it is much worse for women than for men. I have to explain that.
Yeah.
So it may, I mean, it's not, you see, people say, well, how long do people spend on the website, or what website do they look at? But it's unclear because it's about content, right? So at the moment, we know the age you've got the phone, we know where you're going, we know how many hours you're there for. But the question is, which bits of it are harmful? And the answer is that presumably the smartphone companies, the software companies, well, they don't care, right? They want hits. So I don't know. I mean, that's a suspicion, right? The suspicion is that I think it's about. I think of it as cyberbullying. I think it's about women. I mean, I'm an old white guy, but I'm very concerned about the fact I'm trying to do things that I best possibly can. I mean, I have 2 daughters. I'm doing the best thing I possibly can because I think this is a crisis for women. And granddad is not. I mean, but I'm on it. I'm trying to do what I can do, and people will kind of tell me what is it? What is it that what women are doing? I mean, in a way, what's interesting, if women are accessing these places, and it's making them body shamed and make them feel bad, why do they keep doing it? I mean, if I smack you over the head, one of your solutions is to run. Right. I mean, you send me to jail, whatever, right? But it's like, okay, if it's so harmful, why do they keep on doing it? It's sort of addictive, maybe. I don't know. But this is where we are, and I need greater minds than me to understand the minds of a 23-year-old young lady. But I'm learning. I'm really trying to help.
Well, you kind of hinted to some of it. It's age has a lot to do with it, and if it's cool to be on Instagram looking at what's the next thing, then I guess it's just you're going to keep doing it. I don't know.
Well, but at the same time, Professor Blanchard is saying to you, this is harming you. This is having really bad effects upon you. This is really something I haven't seen before. And here are the potential consequences of what's going on here, right? I mean, that's in a way, this is a sort of addictive treatment. I mean, think about anorexia. I mean, anorexia is a good example, right? So yes, anorexia, you want to have a thin body, and what you're doing is this, but anorexia is really bad for you. It might kill you. And so, we have to somehow or other work out a way of stopping that. And that's complicated, right? It's very complicated. But somehow or other, that has to change, or else you're just going to starve yourself to death.
Right. So, you did say that this isn't something that most people are struggling with.
Right.
It's a small percentage. So maybe there are some women that are just highly susceptible to certain,
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I say to people, so think about think of distributions of things, right? So if I ask the question, how many of the last 30 days were bad mental health days? The mode and the median, so think of the mode or think of the middle person, says 0. So it's not a crisis for everybody. Absolutely right. You said it right. Most people are doing just fine. And most people are probably handling the content fine, right? But they're probably also not spending 9 hours a day sitting looking at their smartphones. I mean, it does certainly look like the longer amount of time you spend on them, the worse it is. So give you an example at Dartmouth. We have a thing called the Outing Club. Dartmouth owns 30,000 acres of New Hampshire. We go and do stuff everywhere. Well, there's 10% of people who don't engage in things. Like they come for a week at the beginning and they all go off to places. Well, there are people who say, I can't do that. I can't leave my I can't leave my dorm room for the night. I can't leave my phone. Well, the
Right.
truth is that the people who would most benefit from being on the trips aren't the ones who were going. Right? It's the 10% lonely who sit at home. And obviously the question is, what can we do about them? How can we get them to engage? So I would say, approximately, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but half the people are doing just fine. This is not a everybody problem. So I talk about happiness. In the past, we talk about everybody's happiness. Basically, I don't really care about 3/4 of people. They're doing fine.
Gotcha.
It's these ones who suddenly are at risk. They're the ones who are at risk of floundering. Maybe they are floundering, right? And people know about them, and there's all kinds of evidence now that this group. I mean, if you say at Dartmouth, we have 4,000 students. We have 2,000 women. Well, 10% of that, 10% of those, that's 200.
That's a lot.
200 women and 7% of men. Let's say that's 300. That's 300 people at Dartmouth. And I mean, imagine every university. There's 300 people who are in deep trouble. What are we going to do?
Exactly.
And so in a way, you want to move the resources from the people to those people. I mean, it's like everybody can access it, but they don't really need it. These are the ones who need it, and we have to sort of identify them and think about them. And we've not been in that place. We have a set of facilities available to everybody, but that's a new world. I mean, in a way, there's a comparison, which is that work by Case and Deaton looked at what's called deaths of despair. And that was a group of people, prime age, less educated whites, who, that was Case and Deaton, and they talked about suicide, drug overdoses, alcohol poisonings. And if you look at that, they peaked in midlife. And obviously people say, well, those are Trump voters. Those are, in this, and the other thing in this instance, which is quite interesting, here's another fact. Both of those facts, both the deaths of despair and in the United States, this phenomenon I've talked about, are basically problems of whites. They're not problems of African Americans.
I was going to ask you that.
Or Hispanics. It's basically whites. I mean, to a much greater extent than you would think, especially when you think of poverty and so on. The low income groups are not whites, right? Well, these phenomena are basically a phenomena of whites.
Are the women, okay, so just for the audience to have some context, so for the death of despair, especially within healthcare, that's the guys, it's usually men who tend to be addicted to opioids and stuff like that, right?
The answer is that there's only one thing I would say that's wrong with what you said. We used to think it was men. It turns out it was basically less educated, prime age whites.
Gotcha.
And I'm just going to take the word men out.
Okay.
It was a problem also to some lesser degree, but it was a problem of women as well. Then later, I also found it was a problem of Native Americans. There were Native American problem, but that was the group. But it wasn't a problem. Think of the crack epidemic. That wasn't a white phenomenon. Well, this is a primarily white phenomenon. Now, around the world, we're not sure, we don't see quite that, but we certainly don't see it amongst Hispanics. I don't see it amongst African Americans. I don't see it amongst Asians. A tiny amount, but if you ask me which is the group, that's the group. And it's also rather the gap between the less educated and the more educated. There's less here than you would have thought. This is a problem if you were predicting it, you wouldn't think it would be so prevalent amongst the highly educated.
Okay.
There are still education differences, so I'm saying it's more amongst white educated people than you would have expected.
So then, okay, let's get some of these characteristics down then. It's usually white, young women under the age of 25. Are they in school? Are they educated? Are they pregnant?
Many of them are in school. The first thing to say is that if you so imagine we sort of think of over the last 10 years. So if I take a sample of kids who are 15 in schools, right, that's who I see. It's bad. And so then they're leaving schools, and what are they doing? They're going into the big wide world, or they're going to college. And so we're seeing, universities, we're doing lots of work at Dartmouth, but we're seeing it amongst our student bodies. This is not a phenomenon of the inner city. This is not a phenomenon of the people who don't go to college. This is a phenomenon that every college president has going to have to deal with. I mean, remember I said 10% of your student body, of your female student body, in my estimation of the data we've looked at, is in a mental health crisis. I mean, that's a big number, huge number.
Yeah, and trying to wrap my head around the characteristics, are they usually religious or not religious? Is it
we don't really have a great deal of evidence of that really yet. The happy people in the past, happy people tended to be religious. Religious people were happier. That is true in the data.
Right, but
I don't know at this moment people haven't really written about religious.
Haven't looked at it. But
no, not really. I mean, obviously this is such a new phenomenon that we're struggling to grapple with. We're more struggling now to grapple with what to do. So if you think let's suppose you and I are the committee is in charge of trying to do things to help these young people, what do we do? And it's not just what do we do, it's what can we do quickly, right? So if you suddenly say, well, we've got 300 people at Dartmouth or other universities that suddenly we need to do something, we can't scale up the mental health services. We can't scale them up quickly enough. You can't hire, the University of Texas can't tomorrow hire 500 therapists. It can't. It's just, there aren't 500 therapists there. You can't hire it that quickly. You don't have the facilities. It would take you, even if you wanted to, it would take you a while to scale up. And if you do, what are you going to do with it? So this is really a huge national crisis.
Okay. I do think that maybe understanding a little bit of the characteristics does help a little, just help a little bit, just for like scouting purposes, just like if you're doing an assessment and somebody comes in, you can kind of see who's a little bit more at risk for certain stuff.
So here's something which is quite interesting. Absolutely. And I have an annual physical, and I go into have my annual physical, and the doctor, he asked me about my leg and all that stuff. He actually gives me this thing called the PHQ score. They actually ask you 10 questions, which are actually really helpful. They're screening questions for how do you sleep well? How do you feel anxious? Do you da 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 da? And so those screening questions are really pretty good. And I was talking to the doctor and I said, so what happens if you so essentially it's a screen and they scale from 0 to 3, there's 10 questions. And if you score some number over 20, that's really bad. And I say to the doctor, if I scored 20 on this scale, what do you do? And he said, I refer you to a psychologist there and then. So there are simple things that you can do that, and then the question is, well, what does the hospital do when you show up? But there are simple screening things that people are now starting to do. As I say, gave it to me in my annual physical. It's a great set of things to do. And obviously the worry is that, you say on a scale of 0 to 3, how do you feel about this? And I answer 0 to everything. But there are people who answer 3 to everything. And if someone answers 3 to everything, there's your flag. So there are relatively, that's 2-minute screen. There are other places. I do a thing with a company, an organization called Global Minds at Sapien Labs, and you can go and take their test. And I'm happy to perhaps send you the link. You can take your test. Your listeners can take this test, and after 15 minutes, it gives you a score back, and it tells you how you're doing. And it says if you score some number like this, you should go and get help. So there are increasingly things like that people can do, and there's now 1.5 million people have taken this test, and it gives you a score between -100 and +200, and the average is about 60 something. But if you score -60, there's a flag, and so people are now starting to realize that there are flags, and then they should try and get help.
This is very interesting. So we know
I'll send you the link. It's
yeah.
Encourage people to go into it. It's free. It takes 15 minutes, and they'll give you a report back and tell you what's going on. And they'll say 1.5 million people around the world have already done this.
So okay, so Danny, so we know how this shows up with women. It's they're filling out these forms saying they're very anxious. There's more substance abuse. There's just more report of less good subjective well-being, right? How does it show up for guys? How does it show up?
The answer is it's a great question. The answer is the same, but just a bit less of it. right? So I have roughly in my head, have in your head, if I took a typical 22-year-old, 11% of women, 7% of men, all the trends are the same. They all start from around 2013 or so. But so if I have to pick a group, it's not that it's not men. It's just if you ask me who do I care the most about, well, I care about, I mean, I've had start with students and I've given talks and young men come and see me. And young men come and see me and talk about, I'm one of the, I mean, several times I've had people come and say, that's me. And I sit and I chat to them. And I've had 2 or 3 young men come to me and say, what you're talking about is me. So I think the answer is that, you had to, it's not present amongst men. It's somewhat different, but I just think that the outcomes potentially look horrible. And the other thing is, think about it's a sort of logic for your listeners. So if people say you don't need to do anything, well, what if they're wrong? So Blanchard says, well, we need to do something. We need to help these young people. Well, what if I'm wrong? Well, we've helped the young people. But if those guys are wrong and say we don't need to do anything, that could be catastrophic. So I talked to the state of California. I went to talk to them. I'm trying to increasingly, John Haidt is doing the same thing. We're talking to people saying, you need to start to think about what to be done. You start to think about programs that can help these people and try and work out for yourselves what works. But you can't sit back because this is potentially going to be a minefield.
So Danny, okay, let's talk about that a little bit. For the people that disagree with you, right, or disagree with Jonathan Haddad, and they say, look, first of all, this is an American issue. This is not a crisis in the way that people are saying. They're kind of blowing it out of proportion. What do you say to that? And then there's also people who say, okay, these are young people. How do you know it's not economically related? How do you know it's not related to a lack of community? How do you know it's related? How do you know it's smart?
Yeah, well, there's 2 great questions there. Let's just start with it. I mean, the truth is, if you go to deaths of despair, that really was an American phenomenon. So if you look at things like deaths from opioid overdoses, it didn't happen in Europe. It didn't. So the big deal there was, I always say to people, there's a simple answer. I mean, doctors went to the same medical schools and read the same medical journals in Germany and France and Italy and the UK. And when people came in pain, they didn't prescribe opioids to them. And Americans did. Well, that was an American crisis. Okay. This is not an American crisis, first of all, because that's exactly what Blanchard has done. I'm the person who's been doing this. And basically, we firstly started to do is to say, well, okay, let's see if it's an American phenomenon. And then there's some other researchers. There's some researchers come from Australia and say, oh, look, it's the same. And then Canada, and then Sweden, and then Norway, and then France, and the Netherlands, and Germany. And so essentially the first thing that's happened is that this is a much broader thing. Unlike deaths of despair, the first thing we show is it's present basically in all the advanced countries. Then the question is, well, is it just the advanced countries? So that's what we're working on now. And the answer is it's much greater in the advanced countries. And it's consistent with the fact that the places where there's a lot of internet access, that's where it's worse. And it appears that it's coming. So think of Africa. May not be present in Africa, but they're selling 20 million smartphones a quarter. Well, if you're selling 80 million phones a year, it ain't going to take that long for the thing to have spread. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is people say stuff, and I've had a disagreement with many people saying, oh, it's about stigma. It's less stigma to report things. This isn't really real. So again, I say, well, if you're wrong, then you're in deep trouble, right? So it's nothing. You haven't done anything, but the patient died. Okay, well, that's something I worry about. But the other thing is, if you say it's just labeling of things, well, why, first of all, is it disproportionately true of women, young women? Why would it not be true of 45-year-old women? Why wouldn't it be true of 65-year-old women? So the first thing, that doesn't make much sense. And then the question is, well, how come that I can show you the internet savvy in Botswana, Nepal, India, Malaysia, Peru, all have the same things? Why would you think that the culture in Peru, Botswana, Russia, China, and India is the same? Are you telling me that there's less of a stigma in Botswana today than it was before? I don't think so. So the evidence is really not consistent with that. But again, I just say to your listeners, well, what if they're wrong? It's like, well, think of, you say, somebody we heard said, don't worry, COVID's nothing. Don't worry, it's nothing. It's just sneeze. You don't have to take a vaccine. You don't have to isolate. You don't have to put a mask on. It's nothing. And and someone says, well, actually it is, and you should go back and read The Great Influenza, and you need to do something about it. So what's the two courses of action? Well, the first course of action caused people to die. The second course of action didn't. So there's there's the sensible path. In this case, I mean, I like there's a great English soccer phrase which I like, which is get your retaliation in first. Right? But that's right. So let's try and think about ways of doing things to prevent this happening. If down the road we spent resources on mental health things that will particularly help young women, well, fine. I mean, if Blanchflower's wrong, what the heck? But if they're wrong, it's really bad. So I think in a way, I'm right. You have to listen to me. And the skeptic, in the long run, we're all dead.
Yeah, Danny, well, talk to us about how did COVID have any impact on mental well-being related to this?
Yeah. So essentially, what happened was that COVID comes along, and obviously, I mean, many places, like in the United States, didn't really track very well-being. They didn't track. Other countries did better in the UK and elsewhere. So what happened is COVID comes along, and America suddenly says, "Oh my goodness me, we've got to start tracking this thing." And you track it, and what you find is that, there's surprise as the COVID thing comes, and more people start to die. This has this is not good to see. What do you think it does to people's happiness? Well, but here's another thing. Many of the international surveys, turns out according to these surveys, people got happier during COVID, which makes absolutely no sense, right? So the thing with the Gallup World Poll, it shows you that during COVID, people got happier, which is ridiculous. Of course they didn't. They got less happy, right? So basically what happened was that we tracked a lot of things that were going on in COVID, and clearly 1 million people in America died. And that had an effect on people. People were unemployed. We know that unemployment makes people unhappier. So it's certainly true that things happened during COVID, and then now we've got stuff like, okay, people are now working from home, and what does that do? And all. But the truth is that we sort of thought, I think the way we thought of it was, here was our happy little world, and then COVID came along, and you observed, oh look, these bad things, mental ill health rises, and children's scores performing badly, and they weren't doing well. But then what we realized is that, well, actually, if you look back here, all these trends had started. The performance of test scores in schools, deteriorated in COVID, but they've been deteriorating for 6 or 7 years before that. So COVID made things worse, but they exacerbated and extended existing trends. So then when you think of that puts COVID in a different context. It just says, if COVID hadn't come along, maybe we could have reversed it. But it isolated people. I mean, maybe they were cyberbullying. Maybe what happened is, I think they were isolated. I tell a story of my students. I tell one story, and I say, so what happened after we did the Zoomy thing? I came back and I said, it's really interesting. You guys, I've noticed you guys don't talk to each other. You don't talk to each other. So it's different to before. And one kid said to me, I always remember this. He said, you know why we don't talk to each other? I said, no. He said, because we don't know each other.
Oh. Okay.
So I think this is a good thing for the podcast. Isolation is bad. Knowing each other, interacting with each other, not bowling alone, going to clubs, loneliness. We have to find ways. In a way, you go out with your friends, that's fine. But maybe the big story that teaches you is, well, what about one of your friends who doesn't join you? What about one of your work colleagues who sits at home? Maybe the task is that the 6 of you who are going out, maybe they go and say, no, you're not going to sit at home. We'd like you to come with us. You know what I mean? That might be the lesson that you draw from this, but it's about isolation. It's about the lonely. And then if you're isolated and lonely, what do? You go on the phone. You make a cyber world.
Well, Denny, talk to the audience about adverse child experiences.
Yeah.
You said that was a huge contributor,
and
you looked at many studies. So tell us how that plays out, and what specifically plays out.
So we started to think about. So this is in the context of what I've been talking to you a little bit about. So the question is, what experiences in childhood What do they do? How do they impact you? So let's think of a few of them. Do your parents divorce? Is one of your parents in jail? Were you abused sexually or otherwise? Were you bullied when you were in school? So the question, in a way, is that, well, let's look to the past, because obviously these issues which we're looking at now, we've talked about the fact that 15 and 16-year-olds say that they're feeling really, really bad right now. Partly it's because it's related to what they see online. So the question is, well, what do childhood experiences, what do we learn from the past about childhood experiences, and what do they do in adulthood? Well, let's go first of all with, I don't know, breakup of families. You'd think breakup of families, divorce, father going to jail, mother going to jail, any of those things. You think that would be disruptive and might well worsen adult outcomes. Second thing, sexual abuse. And true in the data, it's sexual abuse not just of women, but it's also true of men too. Young men and young women are sexually abused by people they know, people they don't, uncles, all of that stuff. Well, that has harmful effects, and there's a literature about that, and we do something, we intervene like crazy to try and prevent that. Okay.
Yeah.
But something else so all these childhood experiences turn out to have harmful effects later. So that's obviously instructive. But one of the big things that I did was, it turns out I've been working on a set of data. It's from Britain, but it's really interesting. The audience might have heard of this movies called 7 Up, 11 Up, 16. This is every single person in the UK born in a single week in 1958. And they've been followed since 1958, and they've been sampled. So we know everything about every single thing about their birth, about their birth weight, and if they survived birth and so on. So there's 18,500 people, and they've been followed numerous times. So they were surveyed when they were 7, 11, 16, 23, 30, 33, 40, 42, 50, 55, and 62. So basically what I did was I went to the data and I said, oh, look, when they were 7 and when they were 11, their mothers, so this is not recall, many of these things are recall, like you say, were you bullied when you were 7? You say, okay. So this is in 1965, their mothers were asked, was Mia bullied at school? If so, by whom, what, whatever, right? And then again, when they were 11. So this is not by recall. This is not, if I asked you when you were 7, were you bullied, you may or may not tell me the truth, right? But presumably in 1965, mom actually tells you the truth, let's assume. So the question is, what does that do? And the answer is, if you were bullied when you were 7 or 11, the effects on your life are catastrophic. So to make it very simple, so now we follow these people, and at age 60, the fact that you were bullied at 7 or 11 predicts significantly whether you were alive at 60. It predicts whether you've had a heart attack. It predicts, have you had a stroke? It predicts how happy you feel at 60. It predicts all sorts of life events. And it turns out it does things like being bullied actually has an effect on your blood. It thins the blood, and that predicts all sorts of bad things later. So obviously, these people, we can't do anything for this cyberbullying in 50 years' time. But we have data where we can follow people for 50 years. And I can show you that it predicts bad things when they were 20, when they were 30, when they were 40, when they were 50, when they were 60. So because we've got those data, we say to ourselves, we can't take the risk. We can't take the chance that the people all say, oh, it's going to be all right on the night. These young people will work it all out. We learned something, just go back a sec. When I first started work as an economist, I started work particularly on youth unemployment. And we did a lot of stuff about youth unemployment because we said this, and I like the phrase. This is David Ellwood, who was famous dean of the Harvard Business School. He wrote that the problem when you're young is these can create harmful effects later. He says the danger when these things happen when you're young at 22 is they create permanent scars, not temporary blemishes. Right. So if I'm bullied when I'm 72, I can cast it off. I'm a big boy, right? But if you're 16, turns out that might, for reasons we've talked about, it potentially has permanent scar on you. So we intervened in the youth labor market to make sure that young people made that transition from school to work. We didn't want them to have long spells of unemployment. We don't want them to have long spells of poor mental health because it predicts bad things later. And obviously that, you could say, well, Blanchard's probably wrong. Well, what if I'm right? You can't take the chance that I'm right. You just can't in a society. we have the danger. We have this cohort of young people, a cohort of young people who were 14 in 2013, and they've been, who basically that group, a group of people have become 14 in the years since 2014. So it's a cohort of 10 years, a 10-year cohort of people who basically are going to be, who essentially have had a hit against them, and we need to do something to help them, and to try and stop the next cohort coming. I mean, we're trying to intervene in the schools to prevent the next group of 14-year-olds being hit. That's what DeSantis and others around the world are doing. Banning cell phones is a great start. Good idea.
So, Danny, I just want to make sure I got that right. You said if you're before the ages of 7 and 11 specifically, if you got bullied those ages, that was a huge indicator of. But
Bad
16, what about 16? What about?
We only have data. I only have data when they were only asked when they were 7 and they were 11, right?
Oh.
The parents were asked when the kid was 7 in 1965, right? So we know that data, and then I can look and say, now I follow them. I interviewed them again when they were 11. I've interviewed them again when they were 16, and I show you in the paper. Well, what about at 16? What about at 23? What about at 33? What about at 40? What about at 50 and 60? Right? And so we can look at things like, well, did they form relationships? What was their income? Did they die early? Did they have a heart attack? Did they have whatever? So we can literally track, and then we look back and say, well, what did this do? And the answer is, well, what do we think about now? What we do? Here's another example. So what have we learned from that? Well, bullying in school is a big deal these days, right? It wasn't 50 years ago. But kids, schools are they're very aware of the need to stop bullying, right? When I was a kid, there was lots of bullying going on. I don't think the bullying goes on to that extent. Well, why? Because we learned that bullying has really bad effects. And we try to change the culture, and someone takes your kid and someone comes and hits your kid, that's going to be a really bad thing. We're going to get that kid out of there, and we're not going to allow this to happen. And the child has to have a voice. When I was at school, I didn't have a voice. I used to get beaten up all the time. And that's not good, right? So we learned.
But you turned up okay. But
most people turn out okay. It's just some people don't turn out okay, right?
Okay.
But I still think we should stop it. I mean, I care about my grandkids, and I care about the schools. One of my grandchildren wasn't doing well at school, and we moved him out, and he started a new school today because he wasn't happy in the school, wasn't learning to read, didn't want to go to school, and so we moved him today.
Gotcha. So even with bullying as well, I guess some people turn out okay, maybe depending on certain factors, right. And other people turns out really bad.
Well, they turn out really bad, and the only problem is always in this counterfactual. Do you think I would have been a better person if I hadn't been bullied? Probably. I think it had an impact on me. Were you bullied at school? You don't have to answer, but
I was never. I think every kid gets a little.
Yeah, every kid gets a little. I mean, I was in a boys' school. We're in a boys' school. I mean, I remember the biggest thing that happened to me when I was 15. I was like 5'4", and when I was 16, I was 6'1". And the bullying stopped. The bullying stopped, and acquiring another sort of 8 inches of height solved my problem.
Oh man, you got really lucky there, Danny.
I got really lucky. I would tell you I got just good looks, and everyone thought how great I was, but it wasn't. It wasn't. I was, my wit and repartee and good looks. It was just that I became an animal.
So there's definitely a link. More than likely, you're basically saying that if regular bullying, like non-cyberbullying, causes these bad side effects, then it's a the potential. You see, the potential. The reason why this is pretty interesting is that I just think, how would I possibly know what the effects of cyberbullying are? I don't know, because it turns out that in our stuff, the bullying. Would you have known the effects of bullying continue for 50 years unless we did it? So the danger is that that's possibly true. We can't allow for the possibility for that to be true. That's it. And the consequences are bad. I do things like, how healthy are you? Well, it impacts physical health. It impacted things like, the paper's written showing it impacts
the thinning of the blood. By age 42, we were able to look at these people's blood, and their blood was different than the ones who hadn't been bullied. It had physical manifestation on people. And you and I've talked about that there's physical manifestations. You see, you're nodding. I'm looking at you. Not that's you and I. We're interacting with each other. We're learning. So it is physical manifestations of things, and these young people's brains potentially haven't developed in a positive way, which may well predict bad outcomes down the road. It's unlikely to predict good outcomes.
Right. It is unlikely to predict good outcomes. What what societal structures can be created, do you think? What guardrails can we put up or
Well,
have?
I certainly think that we've got to start to impose rules on cyber behavior. We've got to
Oh
think about.
yeah.
I think we've got to start to impose whether Facebook and these others want to do it. Bad luck. I think we certainly got to try and put guardrails on things. I like the idea that we don't let young people have access to various things. I mean, the other thing in a way is that the thing I do like is that it's not just that. It's like, so when I was a kid, what did I do? Well, I came home from school and I got on my bike and off we went, and we went outside and we interacted and played with one another. We had actual interaction play. The evidence is that you could, instead of saying let's ban cell phones, is you could start to think about providing useful, practical alternatives. I mean, they say the evidence on this takes smartphones away in schools is the kids interact with each other. So you could start to take a positive view of, let's go and try and encourage, let's try and encourage people to go and do stuff. We'll go and give free swimming lessons. We'll give free golfing lessons. We'll give free fly fishing, whatever. We'll start to think of ways of having kids interact with each other. I mean, as I say, the Surgeon General is on this. I mean, it's like, how can we think of ways of preventing people being lonely? So let's start thinking. I mean, in where you work, there are probably people who are extremely lonely. Well, sit down together and say, well, what can we do? What can we do to get them away from being lonely? How can we involve them? How can we activate them? That's a probably good way to do it. So at Dartmouth, we're trying to literally think of things like take people. I mean, we announced the other day. Here's something we did, which is like ridiculous. We decided what we'd do is we'd announce free swimming lessons. And we thought, 20 or 30 people, about 600 people signed up. It's like hundreds of people signed up. It's like, oh, shoot. Oh, God. Now we need to go and hire swimming. But that's great. Right? Go try it. What are people dancing, barn dancing, anything. Start having things where basketball, let's start to get people involved. They can be involved. I mean, like our swim team. Well, how are our swim teams going to get involved? We'll hire all the kids from the swim team to go and teach people how to swim. Okay, great. Now you're interacting. We're bringing the lonely out. I mean, so I think positive things are probably the way we're going to have to go. I mean, Robert Putnam wrote about the collapse of society and the collapse of bowling alone. He talked about bowling alone. We used to involve people in bowling clubs. Now we bowl alone. So I think that part of that culture has isolated people. And then what happened is that COVID ended up isolating people. And the other thing is, think about remote work. You're working at home, you don't know anybody. You don't know people. So I was in the dentist chair this morning, and I was thinking about, actually, there's one of the very few occupations that AI will never take away, and the internet won't do. The lady cleaning my teeth, there's right, maybe a robot, but I just think we have to start to think about involving and activating the young in elections, in all sorts of things. Start to involve them and activate them. At the hospital, there must be ways of bringing in the kids of the nurses and the doctors, and let's start to run teams. Let's start to think about that as a priority. Probably doesn't cost very much. It might well motivate people. But I think that's where we have to realize we have a major problem here.
Also, I think just using the internet, I think there should be some guardrails. Like, you can't be anonymous and be able to post derogatory or disrespectful stuff. You have to at least have some reputation on the line. You need your name.
And the companies don't want to do this. I mean, I remember a friend of mine who's an editor of a newspaper told me 50 years ago, editors of newspapers were basically the sifter of the truth. right? There was a person who sat there and said, I'm not printing that. That's just not true. Today, you
Hmm.
have no mechanism of knowing what's true and what's not true. I mean, I listened to some of the stuff about the election, and people are just, they have no clue what's the truth or not. But, you know, they have no, someone can spew anything. And
Yeah.
how do you know whether it's true or not? And I think we have to sort of deal with, you know, like, well, here was the thing in the debate. Are you going to, I mean, are you prepared to allow a fact checker? Oh, you mean, you mean I can lie and it's fine to lie, and you're objecting to the fact that someone might say, well, that's a lie. That's nuts. You know, that's absolutely nuts.
In America, if they
In America, you object to having a fact checker?
if they have a fact checker, it's gonna have to be AI because no one's gonna no one's gonna want it to be a person. They're
Right,
gonna be like
yeah, but
something. They're
you
biased.
know, but in a way, the reason for this is that I'm sort of saying the reason for this is that it's having a very harmful effect on our children, and it's personal, and it can be personal. So think about you. It's you, it's your boyfriend or girlfriend, it's your sister, it's your friend, it's your neighbor, it's someone you know. And obviously, when these events become personal, think of the crack epidemic, all of that. When it becomes personal, people need to do something about it. And this is personal. It's affecting the middle class. It's affecting all kinds of people. And people, you know, you say, here's what the situation is, folks. We need to do something. And Blanchard's a bright guy, but he doesn't know what to do. He needs your help. It's not, you don't have to listen to me and say, oh, he's telling me a lie. I'm not telling you anything. The great thing is I'm telling you, I don't bloody know. I don't bloody know. And we need to do something. So get together, work on this, have a community lunch, let's you know, let's care about these people. Let's not let them be left behind. Think about there's been an issue about drugs and drug overdoses. This might be a way of preventing. I mean, the worry is that there's going to be a big rise in drugs and drug overdoses and so on. We need to stop that. We need to stop that now. It might have an effect on crime. It might have an effect on all sorts of things. Well, here's your opportunity. If you do nothing, this is going to be bad.
Danny, I do have one more question. Just
Yeah.
because you mentioned that you studied happiness in the economy. What did you and unemployment, excuse me. Did you find anything interesting outside of
Yeah.
unemployed people are
Yeah.
unhappy?
Yeah. So it turns out that I ended up I was a central banker during the Great Recession, and I was one of these people at the central bank in the UK who set interest rates. And the question, in a way, is so think about a shock comes. What does the shock do to people? It has a big impact on people. And I was sort of interested in, well, what happens to think about the unemployment rate or the inflation rate. So basically, as the unemployment rate rises, that hurts people. In the past, rises in unemployment rates had bigger effects than a rise in inflation. What we've seen in the last 5 years or so is that unemployment has been surprisingly low. I mean, even in the Great Recession, it went from 5 to 10, and then it came back down again. It jumped a bit during COVID. But essentially, macro has an effect on people. So think about this election. There was an inflation shock. And it turns out, whether you like it or not, it was global. Everywhere in the world had it. So it's pretty hard to argue, oh, it was Biden who caused the inflation shock. Well, it was true in Peru and in India and in South Africa. And so there was a shock. Well, what was the shock? The shock was that supply chains got mashed when people stopped moving. I mean, the gas price fell. Why did it fall to 2? Well, no one was driving anywhere, right? So then what happened is the supply chain stopped, and then the economy starts to boom, and that caused all kinds of complications. And then there was an invasion into Ukraine, and that had a shock. Well, what we've seen is that had a big effect on prices and so on, and it's had an effect on people's views of things and on their well-being. And so how the economy moves is a really big deal, and it predicts outcomes of recession. What's interesting is here's go back to our thing about the truth. So the question people have been asked is, well, what do you think the unemployment rate is? Oh, 20%. Well, it's 4. Well, what do you think about the inflation rate? 30%. Well, it's 2. What do you think's happened to the stock market over the last year? Oh, it's down 10%. Well, it's actually up 20%. So there are facts that there are interesting facts that have been spread. I mean, the simple one The simple one I think is quite interesting. You could say, oh, the unemployment rate feels bad, the inflation rate feels bad, but you can take your phone, you can go to your phone, you've got a phone and it has stock markets on it, and you can press the button and you can look what has happened to the stock market. So you just get your little phone and you can find on there and you can press it and you say, well, what's happened to the stock market over the last year or 12 or 6 months or whatever? And basically it's up. And so the problem is that people have a perception, right? You can perceive the unemployment rate's bad, you can perceive the inflation rate's bad, but there are certain factual things like what's happened to the stock market. And if you say it's down 10 and the answer is it's up 10, it's hard for an economist to understand. It's also hard for an economist then to understand why people do and vote for things that are against their best interests.
It's perception, like
yeah, it's perception. But the problem is that the perceptions are that, if you say, I'm going to vote for this, I'm on Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, and I'm going to vote for this person who's going to scrap them. Oh, okay. Well, why would you do that? Okay, I got it. But why would you? I don't know. Whatever. I mean, the truth is, the truth is really important. And what's happened is somehow or other we've sort of lost sight of the truth. I mean, you take my point about the stock market. You say, what's happened to the S&P 500? There's an answer. Since January the 1st, it's up 12%. Right? That's it. It's just there's an answer, and you say it's down 12. It's not like guessing or I think it. It's like, well, you're an idiot. It's up. The answer is 12.13426. Doesn't matter what you think today. It doesn't matter what you think it is. It is what it is. Now, if you don't know, it's better to say, I don't know. Let me look it up. But that's a big world we're in, which is complicated.
Well, you know why, Danny? Maybe we can talk about this on another episode. I didn't realize you did this. You did unemployment research, but I will say
lots of stuff on unemployment.
We're talking about reality.
I'm a labor economist, you see.
That's okay.
Do. So the reason, but in a way that go back to all this stuff on the young. The truth is that the big thing that I care about as a labor economist is people being able to make that transition from school to work. Think of like there's the world of work here. It's a big step. And what are you going to do? It turns out you're going to make that big step out of school into the world of work, right? And so going to university helps you to make that step. And it helps you to step in there, and there's certain things that impact it. Well, we've had blows. We've had blows in the last 2 or 3 years, which have suddenly come, and they've impacted people. And the problem is that these effects, I want to really sort of finish on this. The problem about things like not being able to make a successful transition from school to work is that harms you forever.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you so much, Danny. Definitely have to have you back on again. Thank you so much.
Good to chat. Take care. Thank you.
Hold on, Danny. Let me, it has to, okay, stop.